Thank you for coming this afternoon. We are going to listen to Robert Lustig, and please tune in and pay attention closely because we want to have a short conversation right after he finishes talking. All right, Chester?
How did the entire world get this fat, this fast? Did everyone just become a bunch of gluttons and sloths? Obesity's been around since there were people. It's been around for 50,000 years easy. And it was around before McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's. It was around before Coca-Cola. Obesity is part of the human condition, and there are evolutionary reasons why obesity has been selected for in individual populations, because people who store energy are more likely to be able to survive periods of famine. So there is a selection process that goes on all the time. But none of those things explain how in 30 years we have gone from being svelte, if you will, to basically being unbelievably sick. That's what an epidemic, or a pandemic in this case, looks like. That's what plague, influenza looked like. And the question is, what would be the exposure that could account for this? And if it was just gluttons and sloths, how do you explain the obese 6-month-old? We have an epidemic of obese 6-month-olds in this country. They don't diet and exercise. You're going to call them a bunch of gluttons and sloths? This goes way beyond the question of personal responsibility.
We have felt like it's the individual's responsibility to keep their energy balance, to eat the right amount and stay the right weight. But when something goes wrong, like the majority of the population becoming overweight, we have to question that model, and we have to look at the forces outside of ourselves, these huge societal, environmental forces that are shaping obesity.
The reason we're in this epidemic can be summed up with one statement, one idea that has become so pervasive, that has become sacrosanct, that it has become dogma. And that statement is, a calorie is a calorie. It's the first thing dietitians learn in dietary school. If you eat more than you burn, you will gain weight. If you eat less than you burn, you will lose weight. And it doesn't matter if those calories come from carrots or cheesecake. The bottom line is, a calorie is a calorie. You eat too much, you exercise too little, and that's the mantra, and guess what? It doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because a calorie is not a calorie. The only dogma is there is none.
Choose your favorite hypothesis. There's so many. Well, what is it in our environment? Is it just the excess of food? Is it the high fructose corn syrup? Is it the antibiotics we're taking? The estrogens, different hormones and hormone mimickers? Is it the intrauterine environment? All of these factors play a role. So it is not just one thing. I mean, if there's one big thing, it's of course, it is our food environment.
Fast foods, fast preparing, fast eating, and fast causing disease too. And we in our 2-parent working, 2-hour commuting, 2-job life do not have time for food. This is the biggest issue that we currently face. It is the reason that the industrial global diet has taken over the world, is because with all of our labor-saving devices, with the cars and the computers and lawnmowers that you sit on instead of push, etc., etc., all of those things have actually reduced our time, not created it. So this is a function of the changes that we have made in our society, ostensibly for our benefit. The question is, the Western diet, our diet, that we prize and export all over the globe, has now become the industrial global diet because it's cheap, it's portable, it has no depreciation, witness the 10-year-old Twinkie, and it was designed to taste really good, to keep people eating. This is now everywhere. This is the exposure. This is what has changed.
I think we have had a perfect storm. We have had the confluence of this changed food environment, the restricted activity, like no PE in schools, and chemicals that we're not quite sure what we're being exposed to. And they're working together.
Boy, does that look good.
But honey, what'll these calories do to my waistline?
Relax, it's diet delight.
There was a big war in the food field back in the 60s and 70s. And the war was fat or sugar. And so we were remanded as a country to reduce our consumption of fat from 40% to 30%. Well, guess what? We did it. We are there. But the total consumption of calories, and specifically carbohydrate, and especially sugar, has gone through the roof. So it was that directive, that edict of the late 1970s that started the obesity and metabolic syndrome ball rolling.
It is almost impossible to buy those packaged foods without getting a lot of extra sugars that are just going to be toxic for your metabolism. I'm suspicious of anything that says low-fat or diet, because you know that that means that they've had to compensate with a lot of these added sugars.
A perfect example, snack wells. So what's a snack well? 2 grams of fat down, 13 grams of carbohydrate increased, 4 of which are sugar. No fewer calories, same number of calories. And if fat's not the problem and sugar is, you can see where we're going here.
And there's also the change in the food supply so that those highly palatable foods are more easily accessible. So we can reach for that comfort food at any street corner, at any time during the day, and have a few extra calories.
When we talk about the diseases of obesity, we are talking about type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, so blood fats, if you will, heart disease. Those are sort of the big 4, if you will, that constitute what we classically call the metabolic syndrome. However, we now know that there are several other diseases that fall within this scope as well. For instance, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which now affects 1/3 of all Americans. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, which affects 10% of all women. Cancer, and also dementia. Now here's the key. Everyone thinks that those downstream diseases are because of the obesity, and that could not be further from the truth. The obesity travels with those diseases, but the obesity is a marker for those diseases. 20% of obese people have a completely normal cellular metabolism, and they will live to a normal age. 40% of Thin people, normal weight people, have those same chronic metabolic diseases and will die of them. Nobody dies of the obesity per se. They die of the diseases that come from the metabolic dysfunction. So when you do the math, that accounts for 60% of America. We are not talking about a minority. We are talking about the majority. So when you add up the medical costs for those 8 diseases, that is 75% of health care expenditures. Not just ours, not just America, but all over the world. So much so that in September of 2011, the United Nations Secretary General announced that non-communicable disease, that is chronic metabolic disease, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, cancer, dementia, now posed a bigger threat to the developing world, not the developed world, the developing world, than did acute infectious disease, and that includes HIV. This is enormous. This is mind-boggling. This is absolutely staggering that developing countries have a bigger problem with obesity and diabetes than they do with cholera and other infections. When you think about that, that really has to stop and give you pause. Something is going on here.
Researchers at Princeton University have been studying how rats change their eating behavior if they're allowed to drink sugar water.
In a recent study, 43 cocaine-addicted laboratory rats were given the choice of cocaine or sugar water over a 15-day period. 40 out of the 43 chose the sugar. In another study, rats on a sugar water diet exhibited telltale signs of addiction, binging, craving, and withdrawal when the sugar was taken away.
Food addiction is a real thing. It's not a metaphor, it's a biological fact. The studies show that your brain lights up with sugar just like it does with cocaine or heroin. In fact, sugar is 8 times more addictive than cocaine. So if you start your baby early on addictive, highly sugary foods, they're going to become addicted.
One of the criticisms of the anti-sugar scientists is that too much of their evidence comes from animals, not humans. That said, here at Brown University in Rhode Island, they're doing studies they think should make a lot of humans nervous. This rat is perfectly healthy. Put him in a vat of water and he finds his way to safety every time.
5.2.
Now, look at this guy. What he's been eating is the equivalent of a North American diet, complete with all the fats and sugars we regularly consume. He doesn't know where to go. His brain has been damaged.
These rats were totally normal, and then they turned into demented animals. They don't remember their learning after even a day. And as the challenge gets harder and harder, they fail more and more, just like a human with Alzheimer's disease.
36.2.
In this lab, the belief now is that Alzheimer's is really diabetes of the brain, linked to insulin levels, which can be affected by too much sugar. Professor Suzanne Delamonte.
Insulin resistance, we now know.
There are a lot of arrows these days pointing to sugar, refined sugar, high fructose corn syrup, that these are really causing some pretty wacky metabolism that didn't exist when we were eating more of the complex carbohydrates.
We've done a recent analysis of the Food and Agriculture Organization database. We've linked it to the International Diabetes Federation database, country by country. And what we have found is that while total calories do explain an increase in diabetes rates around the world, the effect size is very small. But when you start breaking it down by what those calories are, turns out the only one that correlates with the increase is sugar. A calorie is not a calorie. Sugar is 50 times more potent than total calories in explaining diabetes rates worldwide. When we started putting fat and carbohydrate on the same plate in the 1700s, we became gourmets. In the 20th century, when we started putting fat and carbohydrate in the same food, we became gourmands. It's when you put fat and carbohydrate together that they don't work. And sugar, because of its unique composition, is the only food on the planet that is both fat and carbohydrate at the same time. Even fatty fruits, coconut, olive, avocado, have no carbohydrate. There is no foodstuff on this planet that has both fat and carbohydrate at the same time. It's one or the other, because that's evolution, that's nature, that's what God did, except for sugar. So you say, wait a second, sugar? Where's the fat in sugar? Sugar is made up of two molecules, one called glucose, which is not very sweet and not very interesting, and fructose, which is very sweet and very interesting, and it's the thing we seek, it's the thing we crave. And they are not the same. Glucose and fructose are very different. Glucose is metabolized by all the organs in the body. Every single living organism on the planet can digest, absorb, and metabolize glucose. Glucose is the energy of life. If you don't have glucose in your diet, your body makes it because your cells run on it. And 80% of the carbohydrate, glucose, that you consume is metabolized by all the organs in the body. Only 20% go to the liver. Fructose, on the other hand, is not glucose. Fructose can only be metabolized in the liver because only the liver has the transporter for fructose. All of the fructose goes to the liver. So you're overloading your liver. That's the rub. The fructose goes straight to the mitochondria, gets turned to fat. The little bit of glucose goes to glycogen until it's replete, and then it goes to fat as well. And you have a recipe for mitochondrial meltdown, mitochondrial constipation, mitochondrial disease. And when you have mitochondrial disease, you get sick. Fructose is a chronic, dose-dependent hepatotoxin, liver toxin, which is just like alcohol. In fact, fructose, the sweet part of sugar, is more like alcohol than it is anything else. Alcohol is metabolized to fat, and so is fructose, driving more liver fat that it can't export, more liver insulin resistance, which drives the pancreas to make extra insulin, driving energy deposition into fat cells peripherally, driving your weight gain, and the extra insulin is driving high blood pressure, driving heart disease, driving cell division, which leads to cancer, driving changes in the brain, which lead to dementia, driving every single one of these diseases. And when your pancreas can't make enough insulin and it burns out, it drives diabetes as well. And if you look at the diseases of alcohol and the diseases of sugar and obesity, they are the same. Now, fructose and alcohol can both be nutrients. They supply energy. They're natural. And if you're starving or you're glycogen depleted because you just ran a marathon, fructose and alcohol can be used to rebuild your energy stores, and in which case they are not toxins. But if you're not running a marathon, then what your liver cells do with both fructose and alcohol is turn it into liver fat, then it's a toxin. People think that when you add sugar to food, it has nothing to do except increase taste. Not true. When you add sugar to processed food, you kill it. And it's killing us.
I'm suspicious of anything that says low-fat or diet, because you know that that means that they've had to compensate with a lot of these added sugars. If there's more than 5 ingredients, it's probably a processed food, and there's probably not much real foods in there. It is almost impossible to buy those packaged foods without getting a lot of extra sugars that are just going to be toxic for your metabolism.
We have created a toxic environment. Now, Kelly Brownell at Yale University first coined the term the toxic environment in 2004 in his book Food Fight. And what he was referring to was the changes that we have made in our society that foment obesity. For instance, food available as never before. Food available in places unrelated to eating, like, for instance, whoever heard of having dinner at a gas station? But we do. Designed to taste really good to keep us eating. All of these are absolutely true, and all of these are very important in terms of the obesity epidemic, and I do not make light of them. They are important, but what we're talking about here, when we talk about the toxic environment, is real toxins, real poisons, things that actually damage your mitochondria and make you sick. That's what I'm talking about. This is about something that we are exposed to, that is going on worldwide, that has changed in 30 years. And there's only one thing that has, and it's sugar. Everyone always asks me, why now? What changed? How come you can say all these things today? And the answer is because the science is now here. The one thing that we know categorically that can mitigate chronic metabolic diseases is reduction in calories. And of course, that's why your doctor says, eat less, exercise more. Even I would like to be able to say, eat less, exercise more. The problem is, it can't be done. It's not doable. And there are reasons, there are biochemical reasons why it's not doable, that have to do with new hormones that have just been discovered. For instance, one called leptin. Leptin is a hormone that goes from your fat cell to your brain and tells your brain you've had enough and that you can burn energy at a normal rate and feel good about it. It limits what you eat and it lets you exercise spontaneously because you want to. Obesity, you have high levels of leptin because you have lots of fat, because it comes from the fat cell. But if leptin were doing its job, then you wouldn't be obese. So how do you explain high levels of leptin and still eating too much? Clearly, the leptin is not doing its job. And we call that leptin resistance. And discovering the cause of leptin resistance is the holy grail of obesity research. It is the nugget of truth that we all seek. How come leptin used to work 30 years ago and doesn't work today? That's what it's all about, in a nutshell. And our research has demonstrated some very specific, significant findings. And I can sum it up in one word: insulin. Now, everyone knows insulin. Everyone knows it's the diabetes hormone. Diabetics take shots of insulin to lower their blood sugar. Indeed. So let's take a diabetic off the street, any diabetic. Blood sugar's 300, that's high. We give that diabetic a shot of insulin. Blood sugar goes from 300 down to 100. That's good, right? Blood sugar went down by 200 points. Where'd the 200 points of blood sugar go? They were in the blood, now they're not. They went somewhere. They went to the fat for storage. That's insulin's job. That's not a mistake. That's what it's supposed to do. Insulin shunts sugar to fat. Period. Insulin makes fat. Period. More insulin, more fat. Period. Insulin drives weight gain. And I can explain how this works. Let's take you. Nice and thin. You eat 2,000 calories a day, you burn 2,000 calories a day, you feel good. Normal day. Are you going to gain weight, lose weight, or stay the same? You stay the same, because you burn what you eat, nothing to store. Fine. Now let's do a little experiment. I'm going to put an IV in your arm and tape it down. I'm going to follow behind you, and every time you reach for food, I'm going to pump you full of extra insulin in that IV. Insulin you didn't want or need. I'm going to over-insulinize you, just like we do our diabetic patients. So, you wake up in the morning, you start eating 2,000 calories just like before, but now, because of the excess insulin I'm pumping you full of, 500 of those 2,000 calories straight to fat. Like what the IRS does to your paycheck. Right off the top, gone before you had a chance to spend it, in this case, gone before you had a chance to burn it. You are now 500 calories heavier. If you stood on a scale, you would weigh 1/7 of a pound more, whether you liked it or not, because of what I did to you. Now, you ate 2,000, but you lost 500 to your fat. How many are left to burn? 1,500. Except for one thing, your body wants to burn 2,000 because that's where it feels good. And how many calories you burn and how good you feel are synonymous. Things that make you want to burn energy, things that increase your energy expenditure, make you feel good, like exercise. Things that reduce your energy expenditure make you feel lousy, hypothyroidism, starvation. So how many calories you burn and how good you feel are the same. You only have 1,500 to burn, but your body wants to burn 2,000. So what do we call that? That's called starvation. So how do you feel when you're starved? Crappy, tired, slothy, sit on the couch, don't want to do anything, don't want to exercise, maybe watch TV or play video games. Sound familiar? And of course, hungry. And in a world of free access to food, which we all live in, what are you going to do? Eat back the 500. So now, instead of eating 2,000 calories, now you're eating 2,500. You've increased your food intake to compensate for the effects of the excess insulin. Except, haha, I'm still pumping you full of insulin. 100 of those 500 right off the top, straight to fat. Now you're 600 calories heavier. You're only up to 1,900 to burn. You still don't feel perfect. So you go to a doctor, you go to a nutritionist, you say, Doc, every time I stand on the scale, I weigh more and I don't feel so good. What's going on? Why am I fat? And the doctor looks at you and says, I know why you're fat. You're a glutton and a sloth. You eat too much, you exercise too little, and guess what? He's right, it's true. You are. But it's not because you chose to, it's not because you want to, it's because you have to. It's a biochemical drive set up by the insulin I pumped you full of. So you say, okay, well, that's all well and good. But how does that explain what happened in these 30 years? No one's pumping me full of insulin. Ah, yes, they are. You are not being pumped full of it, you're making it yourself. But you're making it because of the change of the industrial global diet. It comes as part and parcel of that dietary composition. And that's what's driving obesity. So then you say to me, okay, well, if that's what's going on, why isn't my leptin working? Because the work we've done shows that insulin blocks leptin at the brain and makes you hungry. So the higher your insulin goes, the more energy you store and the hungrier you get. And there's your vicious cycle of consumption, weight gain, and disease, all being promoted by excess insulin, which comes from the industrial global diet. How can we eat more than we're supposed to? No one can exert willpower over a biochemical drive that goes on every minute of every day of every year. Why are we eating more? What happened to make us eat more? We had this exquisite system, very sensitive system called leptin, that allowed us to modulate our total food intake for 50,000 years or more. And then all of a sudden, in 30 years, the thing's broken seemingly beyond repair. How can we eat more than we're supposed to? And the answer lies in understanding the biochemistry of the brain, because clearly those signals are not working. So one signal is the starvation signal, which is clearly not working, and that's leptin. And leptin tells your brain you've had enough and you can burn energy properly. But when you don't get the leptin signal, your brain thinks it's starving. The second way is in the reward system. So there's an area of your brain called the reward center. The scientific name is the nucleus accumbens, and it is the site where dopamine works. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and it conveys the feeling of pleasure. And pleasure, for lack of a better word, is good. Except that a lot of pleasure, as it turns out, is not. In the process of going for more pleasure, we have changed our dopamine system. And one of the keys to addiction is the idea that after stimulating that system chronically, again and again and again, and it takes 3 weeks to do this, what happens is that the receptors for the dopamine signal now downregulate. Now there are fewer of them.
We know that the brains of people with obesity do respond differently to food. In that reward center, when they see palatable food, some parts of the brain light up a lot, that wanting part. But the liking part, once they taste the food, it's blunted. It's not that they're getting more pleasure and reward, they're getting less. That's like living with an urge that you can't satisfy. And so people think that this hypo-reward condition, or this inability to experience the same level of reward from the same foods that other people are getting, is causing people to overeat in order to get that dopamine that they're missing.
You have to eat more to get the same effect. And that phenomenon is called tolerance. And then when you pull the chemicals that cause the pleasure away, now there's no dopamine and fewer receptors, and that gives you symptoms of withdrawal. So tolerance and withdrawal are the hallmarks of addiction. We know that this occurs with nicotine. That's why we have tobacco addiction. We know this occurs with alcohol. We know this occurs with cocaine, morphine, cannabis. It occurs with every single drug of abuse. And it occurs with sugar too. And that's relatively new data that has come out in, say, the last 5 years, which shows that sugar specifically downregulates the same factors, the same receptors in that nucleus accumbens, in the reward center, as does all of these other addictive, abusive compounds.
Addiction's a strong word, but it might be a really helpful word to push us to recognize the power of certain food on the brain. There is some evidence that becoming obese does change and blunt that reward system. So we do know that overexposure to McDonald's can cause those brain changes. So food can be just like a drug to certain people who have a certain disposition to addiction. Is it that becoming obese has changed their brain chemistry, or is it that they were born with this predisposition and that caused them to become obese? It's very likely that it's a little of each.
No one chooses obesity. Obesity chooses them. You think anyone goes out and says, you know, I think I'll go out and be obese today. There is physiology, there is biochemistry underlying every single behavior. Sleeping behavior, eating behavior, sexual behavior, drinking behavior are all hormonally driven. What we call behavior is not behavior at all. It's the cognitive inhibition on that biochemical drive. And the question is, how long do you think you can exert a cognitive inhibition on a biochemical drive that's going 24/7, 365, getting worse every single day that you don't perform it? No one can exert cognitive inhibition, willpower, over a biochemical drive that goes on every minute of every day of every year. It's just not possible.
We think that developing compulsive eating and maybe food addiction reflects some real changes in the wiring of our brain. And that's a scary thought, that becoming obese has changed us forever.
We know that this obesity epidemic is taking its toll. We know that if we keep this up, this will be the first generation to not outlive their parents. Here we have this epidemic of obese 6-month-olds. And everyone's saying, how is it possible? How can that be? They don't diet and exercise. They just get fed formula or breast milk and they're obese. How is that possible? Well, it's very possible. Number one, you lay down your fat before you're born. And what determines how much fat you lay down? The baby's insulin before they're born. The more insulin, the more fat. And what determines that baby's insulin? The mother's diet.
We need to focus on prevention. When does prevention start? In little kids? In kindergarten? No, it's even earlier. Is it about breastfeeding versus giving them the bottle? That's even too late to start there. It starts in the womb. And it starts actually even before conception in the woman's health. And so young women are shaping the future generation's health. They're the gatekeepers. And so we should be putting a lot more effort into promoting a healthy generation of women, because they are absolutely shaping the next generation, and whether they're coming out all set up for obesity.
We know that birth weights have been going up over the last 25 years worldwide. And we know that mothers' weight gain during pregnancy, which has also been going up, translates into babies' adiposity, babies' fat stores. So fat cells like to get filled. As soon as they're out, they're hungry. And we see these kids calling for food at age 2 months, 3 months, and the parents don't know where this came from. And it's because they were programmed to do so.
So what happens to a child who had an obese mom? They might have come out of the womb small for their age or low birth weight, but very soon after that, we see how their metabolic calibration is set in this world. It's set so that they are absolutely efficient and thrifty with calories. So they may have catch-up growth. They may have a period of rapid growth where all of a sudden they've gone from being small to being plump, and then they're actually at risk for childhood obesity.
We used to say if a child was overweight or obese, that didn't necessarily predict that they were going to be an adult that's obese. And now it's starting to track across time.
If you have childhood obesity, you're likely to become an obese adult. And if you've had obesity for that long of a duration, you're likely to have early onset of that whole range of obesity-related diseases. So it's a trajectory that starts with these young women. And if we can't help women who are obese and high stress, if we cannot help them, then we are absolutely determining the future of their offspring.
When a woman enters pregnancy at a higher weight, either overweight or obese, she's more likely to gain either inadequate weight or excessive weight per the Institute of Medicine guidelines. So if women are gaining excessive weight and they're already at high weights, this is bad for the woman. She's more likely to have a cesarean section. She's more likely to have gestational diabetes, for example. And it puts the fetus at risk because the fetus then can suffer growth retardation or be born with at a large birth weight.
So pregnancy is another period that I think as a society we need to rally around and bolster up women's both mental and physical health, because that is a short little window where we can dramatically influence the outcomes. The other change that I would suggest is that we think about obesity prevention starting with women of childbearing age, women who are not even pregnant yet, because they are shaping health of our future generations.
As a girl matures, we know that obesity is influencing younger ages of puberty, and the need to develop and mature and go through her own reproduction will influence hanging on to calories and hanging on to fat.
If they are obese, they are already programming the new little ones that are coming to the world to be set up for obesity and early disease.
We know that people are dying younger. We've actually seen it now in the data. This last year, 2009 to 2010, we saw a decline in mean lifespan of 3 months. The first time in the history of the world where lifespan started to go down instead of up. So this is the gift that keeps on giving. And this can actually be transmitted from generation to generation. Fixing the diet is not just a question of fixing the diet for children, but fixing the diet for the mother who's pregnant, which means fixing the diet for the mother before she becomes pregnant, which means all the way back. In other words, fixing it for everybody. That is a public health intervention.
Many Americans are under stress, and we know that that influences eating behaviors. Now we know that it influences metabolism.
If we can bring this to the forefront of people's awareness, understanding how our bodies are conditioned to overeat highly palatable food, and especially when we're stressed, that's the first step to changing it.
Why should you care if you're not fat? Does that affect you? Damn right it does. Yes, you have to care. How does your sugar consumption, how does your obesity affect me? 274 million a year extra in jet fuel? Who cares? Discomfort on the subway because the fat person takes up 2 seats instead of 1? Who cares? Sinking of boats due to the weight. A ferry sank in Lake George. No one cares. That ain't it. So what is it? How about $65 billion reduction in productivity due to obesity? How about 50% increase in absenteeism due to obesity? How about $147 billion in healthcare costs due to the metabolic syndrome? How about 3 surgeons general and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have declared obesity a threat to national security because people who try to join the armed forces are turned away because of obesity? Does that affect you? Yes, your obesity affects me.
Even if you're not obese, you are dramatically affected in every way by our society having an epidemic of obesity. And it's affecting the economic balance. It's almost like an energy balance on an individual level that has gone to a societal level that permeates both the economic and environmental kind of medium that we all live in and are affected by on a daily basis.
When you have something that's toxic and abused at the same time, nicotine, ethanol, cocaine, amphetamine, heroin, morphine, cannabis, that's when regulation has to kick in. And for sugar, which does all of these things, it's both toxic and abused. It's unavoidable, and it has negative impact on society. For sugar, we have nothing. Because currently, in the store, 80% of the food has been laced with sugar. This limits consumer choice. In fact, you can't go into a poor neighborhood in America and get something that's not processed and that is laced with sugar. They don't have availability. Now, whose fault is that? Is that the fault of the poor person? If you have no choice, how can it be personal responsibility? I'm actually trying to reverse that. People say I'm for the nanny state. Far from it. I'm actually trying to reverse the nanny state because the nanny state is already here. We've already been told what to eat by the food industry. And we've gone along with it because it's sweet.
We just need to turn the economics of food and agriculture upside down and completely reverse the incentive system so that we're incentivizing healthy food and sustainable farming and taxing the subsidized food, which is killing us. The corn everywhere, the high fructose corn syrup.
Public health officials consider regulation when 4 criteria are met. Unavoidability, we've got that. Toxicity, I've explained that. Abuse, I've explained that. And finally, number 4, negative impact on society, what we in public health call externalities. How does your sugar consumption or your obesity affect me? All the criteria for societal intervention are met.
One of the criticisms of the anti-sugar scientists is that too much of their evidence comes from animals, not humans. That said, here at Brown University in Rhode Island, they're doing studies they think should make a lot of humans.
And hi, good afternoon. Let's take a small break, and you stand up and stretch so you can wake up your mind for a short discussion. Okay? Would you please stand up or wake your brain, breathe deeply. You guys ready? Almost. All right. So when you look at this slide, there are 4 words in bold: sulfur dioxide, phosphoric acid, calcium hydroxide, polyacrylamides. How do you say that? Something like that. All right, the first one is to make the sugar white, is to dial it. Now, I'm not going to read, but please take a moment and read what you see on the screen, please. When you're done, raise your hand. All right. So when you know about sugar cane, right? Okay. So when you press sugar cane and the juice comes out, that's healthy. But when you chemically process sugars, all the sugars that are processed, that's when the problem comes. That is very sad. I was looking in the internet. There are 56 names for sugars in our food. My slide, I couldn't fit all the 56 names, so I didn't bring, but you can look it up. Names for sugar that hidden in things. You find it's all there. So when you chemically process sugar, that's when sugar becomes detrimental. You see in the screen? Do you remember what the doctor said? You don't find this in nature. You find either glucose in natural products or fructose, and they're not bad. But when they're chemically processed, they become very poison. So let's look at the left side of the column here. Where do you find glucose? In the sap of plants, whole grains in breads, beans, salads, vegetables. The list is very big. And glucose is important for everything in our body. Fructose is not bad. Bananas, I eat bananas every day. Honey, sugar beets, sugar cane. Say what? Carrots. No. What do you say? Sugar cane. Oh, I'm sorry. Spelling is not my first. It's sugar cane, okay? Not sugar care. But now when we have in the bottom, in the Coca-Cola recipient, we have fructose and glucose, tiny traces of alcohol, citric acid, phosphoric acid, mercury, sodium benzoate, and benzene, and many others. So that's where the issue comes. Do you remember this slide? The first four are the metabolic syndrome, the classic metabolic syndrome. Hypertension, the lipids, the heart disease, and the diabetes too, and the suffering that I see every day at my job. And with that carries this whole complete picture here: dementia, cancer, polycystic ovarian syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver system. Basically, in my opinion, when we are ingesting sugars, we are playing with fire. Because you never know if you're addicted or not until you have a headache, or you feel bad, or if you're depressed, you need to have more, and it's a terrible thing. So Ellen White talks about temperance is the moderation in what's healthy and avoid what isn't healthy. We, as Adventists, we are great, but we can improve a lot when it comes to the word avoid. You will not lose anything in your life if you avoid sugar. My personal experience is I'm very sad growing up I had a lot of sugar. I have half of what I have in my mouth is, filled with, how do you say, feelings. I have crowns, and I have, sugar used to dominate my life when I was growing up. It was terrible. I can say that I still like sugar, but I don't buy sugar and I don't eat or drink sugar. We don't have sugar at home. I'm sharing my testimony, and it's very difficult, but I think I'm winning the battle, but it's a constantly need to be vigilant. There is a physician that speaks on the radio. I forget his name, but I have his recordings. And this is what happens if you have a normal meal, healthy meal, right? Just finish a healthy meal. And then at the end, you follow with sugar, a high concentration of sugar. Most of those calories will do what? They will be transferred to fat, okay? So we are actually, Pastor, are you there? If we could legislate not having dessert over potluck, that would be so awesome. I can see you had a beautiful meal. I deserve it because I heard today I was very good during the whole week. I deserve my dessert right now. So, great. You deserve to be healthy. Have you seen this slide? Look at the left side, vertically. Healthy metabolism. 20% of an obese person has normal labs. Did you see that on the presentation? And 60% of healthy persons have healthy metabolism. Look at the right. 80% of obese people have metabolic disease and syndrome, and 40% of skinny people have metabolic disease problems. Can a skinny person have a heart attack? Diabetes, all right? Because look now horizontally now on the bottom. 60% healthy metabolism and 40% of skinny people having metabolic disease syndrome. So let's not play with fire. Be careful. God loves you very much. And he wants, I believe that this is the final push in destroying humanity the devil has done by processing the foods chemically. And the whole point is to destroy our built-in safeguards that God has built in our brain, in our hormones, because Satan wants to destroy our body so we can have our mind that doesn't have willpower. Don't be too hard on someone that has completely messed their whole system. We need to pray for them and teach and be patient. So do you remember this slide? Glucose, 80% and 20% to the liver. Remember this one? What does that mean? Yes, fructose by itself doesn't, it's when fructose and glucose chemically process, it's really dangerous. Dr. Bill Huggins, so what's the function of the liver? Caring. Yeah, caring. It has over 500 functions. 500 functions. Yeah, over 500. All right. I say caring because she teaches in the area of health. I can give you about 20 of them, but I don't think you will. All right. So the liver is priceless. I mean, everything that God gives our body is priceless. Fructose, chemically processed sugars, drives all of those diseases. I think all of them are terrible, terrible. Dementia is dehumanizing when a human being cannot. Do you remember this slide? It went so fast. Alcohol and chronic fructose exposure. Did you see that? I mean, it almost correlates, except from the bottom, it's a slightly different habitational, or if not addiction on the right, on the left, addiction to, yeah, the same thing. Hepatic dysfunction. Do you remember this slide? What is this slide saying? Leptin used to work. What does leptin do? Regulate? Yeah. But one more thing. You're full and you have the desire to. Isn't that great? God created. You're full and you have the desire to do what? To walk, to enjoy life. Amazing. God is great. Okay. So now, what is the problem? Insulin blocks leptin at the brain and makes you feel hungry. The vicious cycle. Remember the vicious cycle? Part of that energy went to fat, and then your body wants to burn more, but then it's blocked. Then you're depressed, and then I think, oh yeah, remember this slide? Starting on the left? So you don't want to walk when you should be. Yeah, or don't want to be active. So a normal person, or not a sick person, 300 blood sugar. On the left, those amount of sugar was given in medication, right? Where did it go on the right? And now you feel the desire. It makes you feel hungry. It makes you feel starvation. And your body wants to build those calories, and you feel terrible. And then the vicious cycles go on. Same thing. You eat. You're stored. You feel like you need to, but you, okay, so let's see here. Let me see where. Let's start over here, okay? Remember this thing here? The receptor for dopamine is damaged. And that comes from the sugar to this place in the brain, nucleus accumbens, all right? So what I understood from that I speak louder for everyone. So what I understood from that, it was very interesting to me. Hey, excuse me, would you please stand up so we can speak louder? Or what I found very interesting in that is dopamine makes you feel good. Yes. So when you eat and you should feel good, what is happening is that the receptors are turned off. It's damaged by the fructose. It's downregulated. That's the word that he used. So it's the receptors or the areas that uses dopamine in your body is locked off. So the whole process of feeling good is not there. It's diminished. Right. So you're going to eat more to try to really get that feeling, feeling good. So, it's really crazy. It's really crazy. Read what's in between. Once food is tasted, it feels blunted. Blunted means what? Dull. Living with an urge you cannot satisfy. It's terrible. The chocolate doesn't taste as good as it did yesterday, so eat more to have the same effect. Eat more, then you have here, see this little thing here? You eat more to have the same effect. So create the effect of tolerance. So in the bottom, we see here symptoms of tolerance and withdrawal are the hallmark of addiction. Did you get that from the lecture? It's like taking Now, yes. You want to add something, Bill, Doctor?
You had to note what he said, and that is that fructose, okay, in particularly
fructose,
more addictive than cocaine, and this effect that it has on the brain. There's another whole set of things that since that was done, we've now advanced and we understand that there are some other issues here that are involved in the eating of sugar, and it's the advanced glycation end products. And we as Adventists, I'm afraid get more of this than we do, say, eating meats and what have you that they were talking about then. And we might have a series of programs on this HEE, they call it, and how we can prevent this. But one of the things I noted on here is that going back to the leptin, leptin resistance is a major issue. And it's because of our insulin levels being so high. And so what we have to do when we look at this is we've got to figure out how can we decrease the leptin resistance. And it's interesting to know that in reducing that resistance, same thing as we've always stated and to reduce diabetes. And you can go right down the list, and the first thing on the list was to reduce the amount of sugar that you're eating. Sucrose, you have to understand, sucrose is a disaccharide. It has fructose in it and it has glucose in it. Okay, that's how it comes in nature. But as you're stating, in your processing aspect of it, going from a raw sugar into a white product, you've added a lot of chemical components, and you've actually broken down the benefits that you can get from the natural sugar, in that it breaks very rapidly. And the fructose, which is really the worst thing in the world. Fructose is the enemy here. But in the natural state, in fruits and what have you like this, it is not. It is the fructose that they get from corn syrup,
the processed
starch, that is the real, that's in all your foods. That's in all your processed foods and everything else. And that's what is causing more of these advanced glycation end products that they're talking about. So that's the new thing that's coming out, and it's been linked to the same diseases, but primarily Alzheimer's and dementia. And so we've got to be real careful when we're eating anything processed. And how you get out of this advanced glycation end product is simply by cooking above a certain temp, at high temps. And what it does, it forms the sugar itself, binds itself to the protein or to carbohydrates, and it forms these glycation end products that is the real culprit. And they have now discovered that what he is saying is true, absolutely, but it goes beyond that. And we've got to really be careful in eating our sweets, because when we eat cakes and cookies and candies and things like this, they've all been used a high temp along with this, and it forms these advanced glycation end products, and we're just consuming them. And they are poison to our systems, and we've got to get away from that. All of us do. Okay?
Yeah, this is actually this is very serious. This is not a joke. It's really serious. It's terrible. I cringe, and I'm so sad to see any person that has any disease or anything in their body that might, let's say you're having the beginning of a cold, drink sugar, you exasperate everything else. Anything that's going on in your body is exasperate. Everything is exasperated. Everything is exasperated. It's sad. So we need to be very careful. If you can reduce, amazing. If you can reduce, amazing. If you can avoid it, perfect, wonderful. You're not going to miss it.
Is, like, for instance, homemade products here today, like cakes and cookies, are those as bad as the packaged or commercially baked products we buy? Is there any difference?
Very, very slightly, but
are you saying that if you cook your own? Yes, ma'am. It's just as bad.
Just as bad.
Just as bad.
Just as bad. Because
if you use maximum without sugar.
I'm sorry, it's really bad. Can you see my face? Really bad. I'm sorry. It's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah, yes, please, loud.
I know that this is something, you said something.
We are taping, so we need to do.
You said something but you kind of moved on, you know?
Oh, okay.
And I really think we should stop and think about it. Because I know we don't buy a lot of sweets at home. But I'm telling you, when I come to church, I'm one of those who get my fill.
All right.
You know, and I think maybe if we know that this is
Really bad.
a health thing, you know, maybe we need to look at, and personally, I only bring fruits because I already, but I don't have the sweets to bring, and I don't want it, you know. But I'm just saying that to help those of us who have a problem with the seeds, you know, maybe we should look at just making it healthy at church.
Yes.
You know.
Hey, Pastor, can we get one of those preachers or Bill anyone to come here in the pulpit and share? Okay, but I will talk later.
You don't want to do it. It has to be something. Yeah, it has to be a guest speaker.
A guest speaker. We are going to have a guest speaker here, and it's going to be a science. It's going to blow everybody's mind, blow your mind out. Great. It's going to be great. But seriously, the thing, one second. So this idea before I forget, love God. And then God's going to allow you to love yourself, and then you're going to love yourself, you're going to educate yourself, you're going to learn, implement, heal yourself, be strong and well so you can be a blessing to yourself, to your family, and everyone, including this church, because we need every ounce of energy and mental clarity to function and carry the message that we have. Yes, Bill?
We made a statement, he made a statement, and they're making them in all the literature that I'm reading today. This corn fructose is more addictive than cocaine. Okay? If we as Adventists know that any kind of food that causes, or anything that causes an addiction is against God's health principles, that's enough for all of us to understand. We don't need to be having a sermon from the pulpit and explaining this. We just should, I know you're going to jump on me, but you need to quit serving desserts in our church. I'm sorry, that's just the way I feel.
Okay, I am more sure that we... Stop. Is there the second? Who is in favor? Oh, okay. Everybody. Almost the majority.
All the people that are here are in favor. Everybody that's not here is not.
They're probably the one bringing it.
All right. I think we're...
Dessert that has none of the above. Like no sugar, none of that. Like she made.
That's regular food.
But it's still dessert. You still get those. Woo!
Okay, he said, "Woo!" I doesn't play with fire. Okay.
You know, the young adults have a Bible class, and last night we went there, and Cherie, the Cunningham's children, daughter and son-in-law, she did a fruit. It's oats, banana, and I think it's raisins. Apple. No, not apples. Raisins and something, I think cranberry. And it was very good.
It is.
You know, I took my little bag, and all of us got a little bag to carry home. But it had a taste of sweetness, which comes from the banana, I'm sure, and the raisins and so on. So, you know, I mean, like I said, I really think, when I sat there and listened, you know, I said to myself, this is crazy that we present this, and then we go back and serve what we know is It's just like we're saying, okay, let's have a little cocaine, you know, after dinner. It's true. And we don't have cocaine at home, so let's go to church. And I'm being honest, we don't want it at home.
Yeah, right. Let's start the fight here. So actually, I have in Walmart, you might do a sheet that has racks, and you can put your fruit and dry it, and it becomes some. God, you love you all. Let me see. I think no one can exert cognitive inhibition. No one can exert willpower over a biochemical drive that goes on every minute of every day of every year of your life. There is a point that you can lose it. You don't know. You can lose it. You can lose your health, your mind. This is powerful. Are you raising your hand? You want to say something? Or just stretching?
No, I was stretching. I was going to say that there's some classes here before with chest tools, step pads, where we did a lot of desserts and things without sugar. So it's not like you don't know what to do.
Well, let's implement it. We know.
Yeah, there's a lot of knowledge we did, and maybe we could start some again, but for the new ones, you know, if people knew, but we did some. Chester, I came over, we did all this stuff without sugar, desserts and everything. Yeah, I do some home.
Hey, there's hope for everyone.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I read Sister White's book on counsels and diet.
All right.
It says, if I can try to remember, sugar is not good for our bodies. We know that. Why we crave sugar is because our body is depleted of nutrients. And if you can feed your body with the green juice and all that is healthy, if you can do it, you will not crave sugar. So let us start feeding our body nutrition of food, juices, greens, salads. Try to eat all these
beans. Don't forget the beans.
Beans and protein. Yes. You can do that, then you will not crave for all the sweet things that we see before.
Yes. So did you get this? You going to say something, Bill?
Just when you get through, I want to talk about how we can decrease leptin resistance.
All right. So.
We have a formula.
All right, so I'm going to wrap real quick now, and you can finish with that. So remember that slide. When does prevention start? When you're a little girl, before you're born and everything else. It's so sad when you come into the world and everything stack up against you. Stress, I edited this video. I didn't do a good job. I edited, you see my addition, right? But there was a whole section about stress, the stress hormones messing up everything else and messing up more things, but turns on brain pathways that makes us crave calories and seek comfort food. The Ellen White, the free use of sugar in any form tends to clog the system and is not infrequently a cause of disease. You get that? Long time ago. Especially harmful are the custards and puddings in which milk, egg, and sugar are the chief ingredients. The free use of milk and sugar taken together should be, that's not a bad word, should be avoided. Avoided. Bill, come. Can you take me the microphone? Excuse me a second. No, please come on. Can we give him the microphone, Chester?
When she made that statement, did you see that? Should be avoided, right? Well, now we know why. Because it forms those advanced glycation end products I'm telling you about. Now I'm going to have a program on this because I think we need to know it. And it's in, if you're eating crackers, if you're eating even bread that is produced with any of these simple sugars, they're getting these. And this has been linked now to the increase in Alzheimer's. And, but if we know these things, it's up to you. You know, it's individual choices when you do this. The natural sweeteners that in fruits and foods that we get, there's nothing wrong with those. Okay? I'm not saying that those sweets are bad. They're not. But it's when they process this stuff. That's when you get into trouble. And I will tell you, you've heard me say this, the only way to, when you go in the store and you go get your foods, you go around the perimeter of the store. You'll never go down the center aisle. Because that's where you get all this nasty stuff. Yet, by the same token, you saw the fast foods we're getting and what have you. All right, let's talk about leptin, because... Yes, ma'am.
You know, I noticed in Publix is putting them around the perimeters now.
I know.
True. I go and I say, oh my God, they've started to put them around now. You know, it's like they have them on sale and they put them right as you go.
But you know, the main reason that I came out of my semi-retirement to go over to the villages and help develop this farm to grow produce that has a high level of dense nutrition is primarily because the people over there asked me to. They said that we're offering so much for our people here in the villages, but we got to add the rest of it, and we need to build a good food base for our people here. Well, that's the villages, folks. You know? And you know what they told me? They said, we have to mimic what the Seventh-day Adventists are doing. Wow.
Guess we better start doing it.
Yeah. Somebody's doing something right somewhere. Because we're living longer.
They saw the blue zone, that's it.
You know, you can take that Adventist health study, you can look at what they've eaten there. Okay, you can see that some still drink wine. Some eat meat, right? But yet, they use that as the example of the only blue zone in the United States. If you don't know what a blue zone is, that's the areas of the world where people live longer than the average populace. There's a lot of centenarians in the group, and they live to be healthy up until their old age. So that was the example they give. I mean, share this with you. What a golden opportunity for us to witness today. Yes. I mean, I had these people tell me about the Seventh-day Adventists, and I'm sitting there saying, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, but I didn't say it to them until they were through with their conversation. The Blue Zone people came in, and they were making their presentation, and they're talking about wine, and they're talking about beer, and I said, I just had to interrupt them. I said, no, that's not true. I said, and of course, they wanted to know what I knew about it, and I said, well, I happen to be a Seventh-day Adventist. I know what they eat. I know what they preach. Then I thought about the sugar. I'm saying we're missing a link here. We've got to get away from this. All right, enough of the soapbox. How can you reverse leptin resistance? Right? Number one, cut out sugar.
Number one, the biggest one.
Cut out sugar. Cut out all forms of simple sugar. Okay? Number two, exercise. 30 minutes a day, every day. And it doesn't mean you have to get up and do aerobic type exercise. It's a simple walk for 30 minutes a day. Clean up your colon. Your colon. You got to eat a lot of fiber. How much fiber should you get? Karen, you remember? How much fiber should you get a day for women? 35 grams a day. The average woman today is getting around 12. How much should men get a day? 50 grams a day, minimum. Okay? Right. Because we produce more toxins, I guess. But eat probiotics. Okay? And then the beautiful one is get your polyphenolic compounds. You know what a polyphenolic compound is? Where do you get those? What? Fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains. You don't get it in meat. You don't get it in milk, and you don't get it in sugar. Okay? Can you remember those? Those are simple ones. There's some more. But those are the simple ones that you need to do to help to reduce that resistance. And guess what? The American Diabetic Association, the American Cancer, American Heart, are all saying the same thing. They're saying you need to reduce your sugar. You need to be on a whole food, plant-based diet. You need to increase your exercise. Reduce your stress, as you mentioned up here. Get more sleep. Okay? And I'll add the one that's the most important, that's trusting the divine power.
Yeah.
Right, so we're going to trust in the divine power because God can and we allow Him to change our lives. Shall we pray? Lord Jesus Christ, thank you that we have a wonderful message, a great message. Allow us to have the courage to implement in our lives so we can have full and fulfilling lives to worship and praise you in a better condition and be a blessing to everyone around us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Thank you. You guys are amazing.
Yeah.